Hello and welcome to ADHD History, the show where we take overly large historical concepts and... Wait, that's not what we're doing today. Today we're going to do a Q&A video where I am going to answer some questions that viewers have sent in. So let's talk about stuff. This video is going to be a bit longer than usual because I'm going to be taking a few different topics and kind of exploring them a little more. So if that's not your thing, feel free to click around. I should have linked the YouTube bar divider thing so you can click to see if there's any questions that interest you. And yeah, so let's get started. So the first question we'll be discussing is one from user Eben B. His question should be right here. He asks about the Waegmunding people from who are mentioned in Beowulf. And the reason I chose to do this instead of as its own video in the Barbarians series that's coming up is because we know so very little. I really wouldn't have enough content to make a full video. But yeah, let's talk about these guys, and let's talk a little bit about medieval Sweden. So there are kind of three major peoples of the time period. There are the Sami, who are kind of up north. They're more nomadic, pastoral people who do a lot of reindeer herding. They're kind of the forest people. And then there are the more Germanic two clans in southern Sweden, known as the Jötar and the Sviar. And Sviar end up dominating both of the other two groups, and they are where we get the name Sweden. Now, so the Waegmunding are only mentioned in Beowulf and pretty much no other written text. So we kind of have to rely on it as our main source. Now, Beowulf himself is a Waegmunding, and he fights in the war between the Jötar and the Sviar on the side of the Jötar, which suggests that maybe these guys were part of that. But also in the text, it is mentioned that Wiglaf, one of Beowulf's ancestors, comes from the Skjolfing dynasty, which is the Swedish ruling dynasty. So this means most likely they are Swedes. And we also note that Beowulf's father was exiled from the clan for murder and failure to pay the Weregild, which I'll explain in a second. So this suggests that they are a Swedish line who get exiled and end up joining the Jötar in the struggle for domination of the peninsula. Anyway, real quick, Weregild is a term in Old English. It literally means mangold, were meaning man, same root as werewolf, manwolf, and gild is gold, mangold, and the mangold is something you pay to stop a feud after you've killed an enemy family member. And in Old English law codes, they had a bunch of different rules on how much someone was worth based on the kind of their class in society. So freemen, churls, as they're called, are worth a certain amount. Slaves are worth significantly less. And then thanes or earls in Old English are worth quite a bit more. Thanes being the warriors who are land-owning. They're kind of the proto-knights, but they're not quite the same as French knights or like continental knights. So because Beowulf has come up, I have to talk a little bit about the barbarian narrative in it, but it's kind of short. Grendel and his mother, by extension, come from the limits of society. He's described as wandering around the marshes and fens, because those are the regions that are the border territories that the agrarian people don't like to go into. And so the fear of the border can be seen here in this epic poem that is so widely read even today. So that's about all I have to say about that particular question. The second question comes from my grandma. Actually, she asked me two questions. One was she had pointed out that I had used the word barbarian, so that's kind of why I made the Barbarians video, to talk about that word and the origins of it, and I kind of use it in a self-consciously problematic way, but she's absolutely right that if people don't know that, it's kind of a troubling word, isn't it? Anyway, the second thing she had asked was kind of for a general timeline of the Roman Empire to put Zenobia's rise to power into context. So, the Roman Empire. It's hard to say when the Roman Empire starts, but the city of Rome itself is founded sometime around 750 before Common Era, by the legendary figure Romulus, after who the city is named. And then, for the next 250 years, it exists as a monarchic city-state until something kind of horrible happens. A woman from Rome named Lucretia is raped by the king, and the outraged population rises up and kills the king and establishes the Republic, and decides from that point forward there will be no kings of Rome, and it will be many hundreds of years before a Roman calls himself king. And indeed, king was even used as an insult for quite a while inside the Roman Republic. And now, the reason I say it's hard to say when it becomes an empire is because up to this point it's still just one city. And over the course of the Republican period, it actually expands a tremendous deal. Though for the first few hundred years, it's a very slow expansion. They spend a very long time just conquering Italy. And then they fight the Carthaginians, who are a Punic, that is to say Phoenician, mercantile empire based in North Africa. And the Carthaginians kind of have domination of the seas. Now, so the Romans, up to that point, really only controlled Italy, Corsica, Sardinia, and a bit of the Balkan coastline. But after they defeat the Carthaginians and establish naval supremacy over the Mediterranean in 201 before Common Era, they begin to expand very rapidly, taking over, in the next very short period of time, the rest of the Balkans, Iberia, Syria, most of North Africa, and about 150 years later, they end up taking over what is now France, what they called Gaul. It was inhabited by a Celtic people called the Gauls. And so these wars, this rapid expansion ends up causing a huge influx of slaves into the empire, which now really can be called an empire. And this ends up causing quite a bit of social turmoil, among other things that cause this, and I will talk about that. I hate to have to make a Caesar video because Caesar is probably one of the most over-discussed topics, but he's also very fascinating, and I think a lot of people kind of leave out kind of the causes of Caesar's rise to power. But anyway, so in the middle of the 1st century before Common Era, Caesar is actually the one who leads the invasion of both Gaul and Britain. And then he ends up coupping the Senate and trying to establish sole power, though he is killed very shortly afterwards and replaced by his adopted son Octavian, who rules as sole leader for 38 years, I believe, something like that. And this is when we start what we call the imperial period. So the imperial period lasts for the rest of Rome's existence, with a series of emperors, sometimes multiple emperors, sometimes one emperor. We break it down kind of into a series of dynasties. The first dynasty, founded by Julius Caesar, is called the Julio-Claudian dynasty. They are succeeded. After Nero is the last Julio-Claudian, he dies, and there is a civil war called the Year of the Four Emperors that results in the rise of the Flavian dynasty. And so the Year of the Four Emperors, by the way, is 69 of the Common Era. Nice. And the Flavians then go on to rule until 96 of the Common Era, and we won't get the Year of the Five Emperors or the Year of the Six Emperors for another century or so, but they do happen. And the Flavians are replaced by what is known as the Nerva-Antonine dynasty. And this is often seen as kind of the golden age of Rome, which is obviously problematic in some way, but the golden age, it started by a guy called Nerva, who is pretty much a nobody. He's just a non-controversial senator who gets put in as emperor when the succession fails to prevent a civil war, and he ends up appointing an emperor, and for that entire dynasty until the final one, when Marcus Aurelius has his blood son Commodus take the throne. And if anyone's seen Gladiator, you've seen the kind of pop culture version of what Commodus was like. He really liked being a gladiator and didn't really like running the empire, and that's actually kind of true. But so this time of appointed emperors, we get what are called the five good emperors. These are Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus, and Marcus Aurelius. Now, Commodus then dies in 192 of the Common Era, bringing an end to the Nerva-Antonine dynasty, and bringing in the year of the 5 emperors, which is another civil war in which 5 men are declared emperor, and eventually one wins, and he founds, this man's name is Septimius Severus, and he founds what is known as the Severan dynasty. Now, it's worth noting that Rome is in territorial decline from the time of the Antonines onwards, but it is by no means weak. It is just kind of more inward-looking. It spends a lot more time fighting civil wars. They spend a lot of time building walls and a lot less time conquering new lands. The Severan dynasty then ends in 235 of the Common Era with the death of Severus Alexander, leading to a thing I talked about in the Zenobia video, which is the crisis of the 3rd century. And it's not necessarily the death of the emperor that caused it. There's a lot of causes, but he's kind of the final spark. And if you haven't seen the Zenobia video, it should be linked over here. And this crisis then lasts for about 50 years. We've got 4 very unimportant little dynasties thrown in. And eventually that is ended with the rise of Diocletian. And really kind of Aurelian before him. Oh, and also the year of the 6 emperors was in 238 for anyone who was keeping track. It's part of the crisis. After Diocletian and a few of the other generals around his time who ascended, who were considered non-dynastic, Constantine eventually takes power. He's very well known for being the Christianizer. The Constantinianic dynasty. Constantine and his descendants rule from 305 to 363, when they're replaced by Valentinian, who kind of begins the split of the empire. It's still very much one empire with 2 emperors, but the line is there that we are familiar with of the Eastern versus Western Roman empires. And they rule for a while until 378, when Valens, the then Eastern Roman emperor, is killed in battle against the Goths. And I will make a Goths video at some point because I love the Goths. Theodosius takes his place and manages to defeat the Goths and ends up controlling both halves of the empire, but only for his reign. After his death, he divides the empire between his 2 sons, which is the permanent divide. Theodosius is also the founder of the final dynasty, the Theodosian dynasty. And eventually, we end up with what we call the Shadow Emperors, who are a series of very weak, non-dynastic emperors, arguably starting with Majorian, although I would argue Majorian's the last emperor to hold any real power in his own right. He, though, does have a German general who wields quite a bit of influence named Ricimer, but so did a lot of the Theodosians. Honorius and his immediate successors were very much in the grip of a Vandal general named Stilicho. And eventually the late emperors are basically just puppets of these German generals after Majorian. And at this point, too, by the time of Majorian's reign, the Roman Empire has shrunk down to just controlling Italy and a little bit of Gaul. And so the final emperor, then, is a guy called Romulus Augustulus. He's deposed as a child by his general, Odovacar, or Odoacer, is how I hear English speakers mostly pronounce it. And this general then declares himself king of the Romans, and does not declare himself emperor, and rather sends the royal regalia to the empire, to the Eastern Empire, to Constantinople, and declares himself to be a vassal of the Eastern Roman Empire. So while we say, yes, the Western Roman Empire fell in 476 when Romulus Augustulus was deposed, it remained a part of the Roman Empire for quite a bit longer, if a slightly awkward one. And it gets really complicated after that. I'll probably make a video about the breakup of the empire, because it's really a complicated topic and very interesting. But that's about all I have to say about the general timeline of Rome. And that about wraps up this Q&A video. I was hoping to do a few more questions, although I think this one's getting a little bit long and I don't really have any other viewer questions. I will be making full videos on a couple of the Barbarian questions, which I should have right here. And I will see you all in the next video. If you enjoyed this, go ahead and subscribe, like, comment, share, whatever you like to do with videos that you like. And if you didn't like, go to the comment section and tell me why you didn't like it, or just insult me. I'm fine with that too. Thanks for watching. Later.